Do we have any other interviewees who would like to answer questions from the third part, sorry, or should we move on to the next part? Yeah, great. So the next part 4, is about the local economic development and local issues, and so basically the origins and the reasons why local CDAs were formed. So the questions I asked as examples were who supported cooperative development in your area. So I think most of you already answered that question. You already covered that one. But there's maybe the role of local trade unions. So it might be that you did not mention them because they were not helping much. But if some of them were, maybe you would like to go over that in your answers. And the next questions were why was cooperative development most needed in your area? And was it seen as a response, a local response to or an alternative to conservative policies and thinking in the early 80s especially? So shall we again follow the same order as before? Yeah, great. So maybe Martin, you're still here with us. That's great. So if you want to start.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, what can I say? Cooperative development support came from a wide range of stakeholders. I mean, Conservative, both county and district councils supported the CDA to a greater or lesser extent. Trades unions, I mean, there was a trade unionist on the board, and the CDA was supported by the Trades Council, although it has to be said that some members of the Trades Council at the time were a bit sceptical because they saw the world as employers versus employees, in which trade unions took the side of the latter, and they didn't really understand how workers' co-ops could or did work. Um, um, Established co-ops, well, there weren't very many, but those like New Internationalist, for example, which I haven't mentioned before, which still exists and is still successful, were very supportive. Yeah, they definitely were. They put time and effort into helping at a practical level, with kind of things like finance and marketing and stuff of that sort, on a kind of mentoring basis, and also, providing board members and stuff. That was all. They were all pretty good, actually. I think in some ways we were quite fortunate, possibly. Why was cooperative development most needed in your area? Well, it was seen as part of the sort of local economy kind of jag, if you like. People, I think David Smith mentioned a bit earlier that, localism and John Goodman said it too, localism was important, and people understood that if you kept jobs and money and things in the local economy and it didn't drain away to American multinationals or whatever, that was a good thing. And actually, that's really why, the Conservatives controlled Oxfordshire County Council continually for 132 years from its foundation until 2021, when it was replaced by a Green, Lib Dem and Labour coalition. So it gives you a sense of just how conservative it was. But it was a very broad church, at least in those days, and quite a few of them thought that local economic development was quite a good idea. And indeed, it was a Conservative council that hired me from the CDA to work as their first local economic development person on the county council in 1990. So it just gives you an idea of kind of where it was politically. Was it therefore seen as a local response or alternative to conservative policies and thinking? Yes and no, but more no than yes.
Thank you very much, Martin. I can't remember who was next because I think I changed the order twice. So on my screen, David is next. But
Well, we're looking at local economic development and local issues, are we?
yeah.
Okay. How to be succinct? Well, I mean, just following on from what Martin said, there was a coalition to be had in terms of bringing people together that had a concern and just didn't want to talk about it, but wanted to do something about it. And the idea of some kind of agency or voice at the locality level meant that you could tap into all sorts of like networks, informal and otherwise, in terms of getting on with very practical measures, such as I indicated with Ferndale Home Improvement Service. These were seen as being practical solutions to problems that had been, that had beset communities for ages, and it seemed to be beyond the wit of the labour movement, really, to get to grips with and do something about some of these issues. Because remember, at the time when we went to and located ourselves at Bethesda Chapel in Merthyr Tydfil in the summer of 1976 in setting up the project, that was a time when up until about 3 years prior to that, there was no point system for allocating council houses. People used to go to the back door of councillors' homes and knock on the door and ask them how much would it cost for a letter. I mean, this is how conservative and mean-spirited the labour movement was at that time in Merthyr Tydfil. I mean, the only bright spark seemed to be the Communist Party and their sort of action within the Trades Council. The labour movement, for all intents and purposes, was dead from its neck upwards. And it was certainly, if you like, Plaid Cymru, nationalist councillors locally who were aligning themselves with and supporting redundant workers from Belitos. As I recall, it wasn't the Trades Council, but it was Plaid Cymru activists who were working with and supporting the Dowless Knitwear Co-operative, which is featured in Jenny Thornley's book, and I think also in a court research unit publication from the Open University. So that is, if you like, the political context. I mean, it contrasts very much with what Martin was actually describing in Oxfordshire, and it was very difficult to get trade unions and Labour Party thinking along fresh lines. It was an impossible task. And so you had to work with whoever you could do so. It was a different kettle of fish in Swansea, because we worked with the Co-operative Party there. In the Teifi Valley, there were people that I knew from university that wanted to set up a local agency, people like Michael Joseph, who was a journalist, formerly with HTV. But it wasn't all easy sailing, because when we applied the same formula in Gwent, it was, I wouldn't say it was a disaster, but you had that, there was a local labour culture that was very much dominated by large extractive nationalised industries. And there wasn't really a lot of energy and enterprise outside of the traditional bargaining relationship between capital and labour. And so it was really hard work working against that culture. But I mean, what was really interesting in terms of West Glamorgan was captured by Jenny in the last meeting, and I haven't caught up with Jenny since I last spoke to her, I think in 1983. But Jenny was describing the way in which they'd set up 50 worker cooperatives. These weren't grand things; they were local employment, economic initiatives, mainly women. Jenny, interestingly, grew into the job in a fabulous way. She had a background in feminism, in the credit, in the claimants union movement, and she was ideally suited to doing what she actually did. And she was very local. So, in terms of local development and and local issues. I hope I've sort of provided a contrast with what we actually understand to mean by the word conservative. We were operating in a very conservative arena across valley communities, whereas most of the time the Labour movement seemed to be working against what we were actually trying to do, because it gave voice and agency to people in a way which they weren't accustomed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. So, well, maybe Alex would like to add a few words from another Welsh perspective here, or Martin could give us his point of view from the SCDC and the work they did in Scotland. Would you like to go first,
No,
Alex?
I'll say a couple of words. I think as David has laid out quite clearly, the individuals concerned who are providing support, but the key thing that I think if you know about it, you can see clearly that he's already in a way said it, but what he hasn't said directly is that the support was very political. It was not so much based on a sort of principle or a theoretical base. It was based on, we're Labour and co-op politicians. This is what we do. This is an exercise of our local power. As a result of that, the funding, certainly from my experience, wasn't very conditional. The funding was, you're a CDA, we're going to bung you some cash, you're going to do a good job, and we're not really interested in the details. So we didn't have to do lots and lots of reporting. When we got European money in or other central government money in, obviously we had to do quite a lot of reporting for that. But our core funding from local authorities was just, we've only got a 5% increase in the budget next year. And it was just that approach. There was a lump sum set aside, and that's what you got. And as long as you didn't do something really stupid and get on the front page of the local paper for corruption or something, you were going to get the funding. So I think that that gave us stability and a sense of self-confidence that our jobs were secure and we would all carry on. But it also meant that we didn't collect many statistics, sadly.
Thank you very much.
Okay, do you want me to go? I
Yes,
can't
please.
really add terribly much because I say I wasn't directly involved with SCDC, and obviously it's a bit different from everybody else in that SCDC was covering the whole of Scotland, which is 5 million people. So, but I say primarily funded by various different local authorities. I mean, the headquarters was in Glasgow, but I remember certainly there was at least one officer in Aberdeen, and there may have been others who supported it. So it was primarily Labour local authorities, and obviously Labour was very strong in certainly in the urban areas of Scotland. So yes, funding through city councils, not really trade unions. Co-op Party was quite active in that, and that was how I came across the Co-op Party, which I'd never heard of before, and I've been a member ever since. And as I say, I think the Scottish Development Agency at that time was also involved. I still exchanged Christmas cards with one of the people from that time who worked for the SDA. So co-op development, why was it most needed in your area? I think Kate commented, well, it was needed everywhere. And absolutely. I mean, I suppose the other thing I would say, and it was seen as kind of like a local response, not necessarily as an alternative. It was using government, UK government agency money and so on to do projects and so on. So it wasn't set up explicitly. Obviously, Labour was implicitly. I suppose the other thing, I don't know if this is the appropriate time to say, SCDC weren't actually very good at the job. There was only one, I think, office worker ever, Patrick Bowes, who I kind of blatantly thought of yesterday, mentioned to John, who worked for SCDC and had previously been involved in setting up Arjuna Whole Foods in Cambridge in the 1970s. And then he'd moved to Scotland and he was a development worker. And he was our development worker at Green City when I first got involved. But in general, the people working for it had no co-op background, didn't really understand co-ops. There was quite a lot of top-down, unsuccessful top-down stuff kind of ventured. At Green City, we fell out with SCDC quite badly in 1986 because Strathclyde Regional Council, the councillors came around to visit us to kind of review the quality of the support, and we, in retrospect, made the mistake of sending them what we thought was a confidential letter to to say we didn't think much of SCDC, which they immediately passed on to SCDC. So we had a kind of falling out there. And Green City itself was slightly involved in cooperative development in that we helped to set up Equal Exchange as a fair trade cooperative in the late 1980s. And we also separated off part of our delivery area in the Highlands and Islands to Highland Whole Foods Worker Cooperative, which again is still going. So I'm really pleased about that. Worked with SCDC on that, but their particular officer, I have to say, was pretty incompetent and didn't understand the difference between a margin and a markup and some rather basic things like that. So the quality overall that was provided, I don't think really was that great. And I think that was partly why in the end, as well as local government reorganization, as funds became tighter, people thought, how much is it actually achieving? So I'm not sure that as an agency, it had that great an impact. I'm struggling to think of any co-ops that it directly. I mean, Green City was supported in being set up by the SCDC in its very early days. It came out of a whole food shop that had set up as a collective and was then converted into a formal cooperative. But I'm not thinking of any top-down co-ops really that survived for very long that were set up through SCDC. But Patrick would be able to give you a better view on SCDC in the 1980s than I have.
Can I just come in and add a couple of things that have occurred to me since today and also since last time? First of all, just to reiterate the unemployment point, it was needed everywhere because there was unemployment everywhere. I've just found this. I was looking for something else, but I found this, which is a graph of unemployment from 1961 to 1975, I think it is, which kind of speaks for itself, really, doesn't it? It didn't go over 1 million until 1975, and I don't think it's ever been below 1 million since, has it, in this country? And that was the background, really. And in places like Coventry, there was huge deindustrialization. So that was one point which was made earlier. The same things about I was thinking about the Met counties and the way they funded it. I don't know where they got their ideas from. People like Jeff Edge and Gary Titley and Terry Pitt, who ran the West Midlands, they sort of kept my memories, they just appeared, but I don't know where they got their ideas from. It would be interesting to know what the sort of intellectual and sort of political histories of that were. Martin, you've got an answer.
Well, I don't think I've got an answer, but I've got a thought. I mean, the GLC was quite influential from the very early 1980s, and it's not as if the GLC landed from outer space when it came to power under Ken Livingstone in 1981. You know, those ideas were being developed quite a lot. You know, you had the alternative economic strategy and all of that kind of stuff, which, I mean, I vaguely remember some of the people you were just referring to, and you know, they were very active in the Labour Party, and they were actually that group of people who were really interested in listening to ideas, something that I wish we did a bit.
But who were they who were they listening to, and whose ideas were
well, people like John McDonnell, Ken Livingstone, Mike Ward, Hilary Wainwright.
Maybe I'm not sure that the chronology. You could be completely right, but I'm not sure. There were those Alan Taylor pamphlets which I circulated to some of you earlier, and I don't know quite where they fitted in. You know, where they did people like Jeff Edge read those pamphlets? I have no idea. Absolutely
yes, I was quite active in CERA. I was on the CERA executive for quite a few years in the late 70s and early 80s. I was very friendly with Alan Taylor. I was involved with writing those pamphlets, as were people like Victor Anderson, who was writing things like the alternative economic indicators type books and that kind of stuff. And I mean, CERA was a real hotbed of that kind of work. You know, people like Robin Jenkins, Road to Alto, who ended up working for the GLC, all those kinds of people were very, very active in CERA in those days. I mean, that was a real hotbed of intellectual thought.
Yes.
Actually.
Right. Well, that's news to me, and it'd be interesting to know a bit more. I don't know whether this is off off territory, off piece for François or not. But if you're looking at the intellectual history of all this, and I'd have thought that was quite important. All that, and they not only did they fund CDAs, but they set up enterprise boards with funding. We had West Midlands Cooperative Finance. There was a whole kind of ecosystem infrastructure for co-op support that was all funded through those Met counties. Was there not? And the second thing, or the third thing, we didn't have much trade union involvement either, but what we did have was we had the history of the CDPs, which I don't know if you know about, the community development projects, of which there were 18, 20. I think, were they England only? Producing this kind of reports. That's what that unemployment graph is from one of their reports. And after the Coventry one closed in 1974, the staff set up a research unit, an activist unit called Coventry Workshop that ran for another 25 years. And we did work quite closely with them at the CDA. So where there was a factory closure, there was one very major one. It was an aerospace, I'm not sure if it was RAF, and they closed it. And we got funding to work with the trade unions there and the workers there, looking at alternative productions. And the factory unit we rented to them, and they started producing various, it was a bit like the Lucas Aerospace. And they started producing things. The workers and most of the leaders of that project had been the trade union activists, the shop stewards in this aerospace place at Bitterswell. We called it BEA, the Bitterswell Employment Alliance, which was same initials as British European Airways. And so there was kind of a grassroots level collaboration with workers' organisations, but none of that involved the formal trade union structures and bureaucracies. It was very much kind of rank and file working.
It's just worth reminding ourselves, there were a lot of things going on in the late 70s. You had the Ben co-ops, you had, as you rightly recall, people like Mike Cooley and Lucas Aerospace. You had people like Mike George at North East London Polytechnic. There was a huge kind of ecosystem of people working on these things, which people like Jeff Edge. Yeah, I remember Jeff well. I mean, I was a councillor from, I was a bit later on, but before I became a councillor, I remember people like Jeff Edge well, and they were, they were really engaged in this stuff.
Yeah, they were. They were difficult people to work with, I have to say, or some of them were, but they were very committed, very passionate. The Polytechnic in Coventry, the Lanchester Polytechnic, set up a unit called UDAP, the Unit for the Development of Alternative Products, inspired by the Lucas Aerospace Committee. There were 2 Lucas factories in Coventry, and we worked closely with them as well. So there were those sort of grassroots activist networks operating, but I don't know how it worked in other places. I only know about Coventry.
Well, thank you very much, John and Martin, for these very interesting elements. Could you maybe share some of the references and the acronyms and the initials in the chat or in a mail later? Thank you very much. Yes, Kate, please go ahead.
Yes, just a very quick thing that the last conversation just reminded me, I think it might be interesting to know, is that we were funded on the basis that we were a job creation project. And this was a very difficult argument for us to have with the City Council, because that's how they justified funding us. And we didn't see ourselves as a job creation project at all. We saw ourselves as a project that was demonstrating a different way to organise work. And gradually over the years, our funding was cut and cut and cut, until in the end, I think it was the only funding that they had. I think after I left, the only funding that they had was the rental income from the co-op centre, which of course wasn't really enough to support it for very much longer. But I'm sorry, I don't know the later history. And I hope that hasn't confused things, David, me interrupting at this particular moment, but I thought it was worth mentioning that. Thank you.
Yes, Alex.
The one thing we haven't talked about, because we've been talking about very much our local CDAs, is the Wales Co-op Centre, or the Wales Cooperative Development and Training Centre, as it was officially formed. And of course that, as we've been talking in the email chat, that came, I think, from some inspiration from the BBC documentary in 1980, the Mondragon experiment, and then the trip when they went over there. So theoretically, they became very supportive of co-ops within the Wales TUC. George Wright was the General Secretary of the Wales TUC. But of course, in the way of these things, a theoretical decision taken enthusiastically at the top of an organization doesn't necessarily change that much as you're going further down. So what happened really then is there was very, very little of that percolating down into the trade unions. So the theory behind it was that trade unions would be the ones who would be able to see opportunities. Shop stewards would be able to see when a company got into difficulties and could be perhaps rescued as a worker co-op in a Phoenix type arrangements, or they could see opportunities in the marketplace. But that never really happened because most of them were old school labor. Nationalization is the solution to all of the workers' problems, and they didn't really get that enthusiastic behind co-op. So you had people right at the very top who theoretically joined in on it but didn't really quite understand it. And then you had this split where down below the enthusiasm never got through. But also, as also happens, I think, with the visit, stuff gets lost in translation. And I don't think they fully understood some of the important points in the Mondragon's success story. One of which is the federalized structure, where individual co-ops actually work together to support each other, and two, the need for funds. And they never really saw the need to set up a large-scale development fund for co-ops, because particularly with worker co-ops, you've got to raise a large amount of money from a very small number of people. And the sort of ordinary working people haven't got that sort of money. So as we see, if anyone who's looked at Mondragon, you'll see that worker co-ops are started that are nominally worker co-ops, but actually are owned by other co-ops, with the workers having quite a small share because they've only got a small amount of money. And then there's a development plan where it will transfer to 100% worker ownership over a period of years as the others withdraw their shares and get paid off from the profits that are made within the co-op. So that sort of structured approach, that structured federalism, has never really come through. And I think that's been a huge weakness with the Wales Co-op Centre, and a huge weakness probably with worker co-op development across the board.
I mean, there's a long story to be told about the Wales Cooperative Centre. I'm not sure how much of it would be suitable for this public occasion. The impression I had in dealing with trade unions when we were setting up South Wales Anti-Poverty Action Centre is that they were living in a different world. And although the Transport and General Workers Union, for example, strongly supported us in setting up Cardiff Student Community Action and Adamsdown Community and Law Centre, when it came to South Wales Anti-Poverty Action Centre, we absolutely got nowhere by being referred to local trades councils, which is basically a polite way of saying go away. we're not interested. And I think I think part of the interest that the Wales TUC had was because T&G were actually losing money and membership. It was beginning to actually threaten their existence as an organization. And I think that was part of the reason why they were more amenable to responding to women working in cut machine and trim factories who were looking for trade union support in finding alternative to the employer who was making them redundant. Most of the driving force for that Wales Co-op Centre initiative came from Dennis Gregory, who I knew well when I was a student at Ruskin from 69 to 67 to 69. And Dennis was quite an interesting chap, and I think he pulled together that application for the Co-op Centre. I think people that were subsequently claiming credit 50 years later were not the people that were around when that submission was being made to Brussels. And the impression that I had of George Wright is that coming from the West Midlands and the Transport and General Workers Union and involvement with the motor industry, I got the impression that he saw himself as another captain of industry with his own private bathroom, a large desk and a big chair, and the way in which they appointed their first worker was basically down to George having like a pile of applications on the desk in front of him and selecting the person that he wanted to employ. This person left within a couple of months, I understand. And what you then had was, I'm trying to remember her name now, it'll come to me in a moment, but our first worker at Gwent Common Ownership Development Agency was now working for the National CDA in London, and he was brought in on a temporary basis to stabilise the organisation. So there's been a lot of resource put into the Wales Co-op Centre over the last 50 years, and sadly, much of that money has been frittered away. Much of it, and that's sad to say. I shall stop at that in talking about the Wales Co-operative Centre, who I have very good relationships with at the moment of my death, and we work closely together with them from Co-ops and Mutuals Wales, which I'm secretary of, in organising various things and working together around common issues, which I won't go into at the moment.
Well, thank you very much, Martin, and thanks to all of you. We have like maybe 15 minutes to go, and we only have one more section of the interview to cover. So I think that's great. We are managing our time quite in a good way. So the next and last part of this interview deals with the relationships between local CDAs and the wider movement. And so the questions are about local CDAs and their relationship with national CDA. So how good or bad they were, if there were any. Maybe your stance or your point of view on the CDA Act and maybe the national policies in terms of cooperative development in Great Britain. And I did a quote from Les Hackfield, so who was a Labour MP for Nuneaton, and he said in Parliament in 1984 that many Labour members at the time had wished to see a stronger national CDA with perhaps stronger powers and loan granting powers. So I would like to know if this is a point of view you share, if you think maybe there was something better that could have been done with a national CDA. And also if, as a CDA development officer, did you feel that you belonged to a wider or national movement? So I can see David's hand up, so we'd like to...
This probably might chronologically help because my involvement, in a sense, with the notion of a national CDA predates the CDA itself. And I think on the last conversation we had, I think I mentioned Terry Pitt when he was working as the research officer at Transport House in London, and was kicking ideas around about Cooperative Development Agency, probably prior to 1974. What we do know is that when the Cooperative Party had its 60th anniversary birthday party, I believe in 19 in June of 1976. It's okay, I've been researching my history here as part of an oral history project I've been involved in. But when that birthday party took place in June of 76, Jim Callaghan made a commitment to establishing a national CDA. Alan Williams, the Labour Corp MP for Swansea West, was a Minister of State at DTI and was given the responsibility of following this through. What then happened was that Alan asked the court movement for working papers, any detail that might support the work of civil servants in working up this proposed legislation, and there was none. So that what then happened was there was a meeting at the Court Great and the Good at the Court College in Loughborough. I know the detail of this because my mother was representing RACS political committee, which she was, I think, chair of at the time. And she reported back to the committee with dismay about the disarray and that there was like no one could basically agree a position as to whether the state should be involved or not, and lots of other issues that I won't go into at this point. Suffice it to say that when RSCS Political Committee were putting a motion together for the Labour Party conference in the autumn of 76, the committee put in a motion around regional economic policy, investment strategy, and one of the bullet points within that motion, which was passed by conference, called for regional CDAs. So we weren't quite local, but that intervention rose from, if you like, my work in South Wales and the relationship I had with my mother in actually influencing the terms of that particular motion. So that was my relationship with the national CDA. Subsequently, when it was established, it was very distant. And anything I actually remember was the chair, I think it was Bert Oram, visiting Swansea and Jenny in West Glamorgan Common Ownership to find out and congratulate them on what they were actually doing. But anybody that listened to what was going on at the Court College in June of 76 would understand that this wasn't going to be driven nationally. It would need localism. It would need the commitment of cooperators locally to drive this agenda. The other point I wanted to make is that when I was at South Wales Anti-Poverty Action Centre, I was under political pressure from neo-Marxists because of my involvement in supporting cooperative development. And luckily, we were able to we were able to bring together a federation of some of the projects that I've referred to previously. And this was Anti-Growth Company or Welsh Community Enterprise. And people like Jenny and Barry Cooper, who I forgot was the guy from the National CDA who rescued Wales Corp Centre. People like that were all involved in putting together this agency. I know that Cardiff weren't initially involved, but eventually I think the people that were employed did attend Welsh Community Enterprise meetings. And that agency, WCE, was set up from about 1978. And I think it lasted for about 8 to 10 years. And it all worked on the basis of mutual support and reciprocity between different agencies and people that were unfunded, but putting together action at the local level to support mutuals and co-ops.